Okay, this is the second video for using R Markdown to write a really nice document that has exposition, code, explanations, plots, all of that good stuff. I'm going to forewarn you, of course, every time you use R Markdown, there are options that you should be ignoring and just playing with later. Most of the default options actually work pretty darn well. The goal of this video is to walk you through some of the default options so you know what they do, and then just to write a simple little R Markdown file and show you how to avoid some of the common pitfalls. So I have a Markdown file started here. You don't have to go through and recreate this one, just kind of follow along with what I do. And if you want to build your own Markdown file, go nuts. So I've built one called My First R Markdown, because why not? With my name, the date. If you don't want the date on there, if it's not relevant, you can just put a space and it'll actually just ignore it. And the output's going to be an HTML document. Again, I prefer HTML. But you can do PDF, you can do Word, you can do other things. Now, this little chunk here is the collection of options that you want to send to R Markdown when you actually build your document. Most of the time, these defaults are fine. So echo equals true. That one, I do want you to know what it is. That one says, I want R Markdown to echo the code into the document, so that way the reader actually sees the code. That is usually a bad idea. So I'm going to change that to false. I say that's a bad idea because no one really wants to read your code. It's like opening up your sock drawer and looking around. You don't let strangers do that. Right? Don't force people to read your code. Now, that being said, there's caveats to that. We'll come to that later. So, I've got a short little section here. Let's do this. I've got a little section. I've got a hashtag to start it. That is a section header. And then I've got a little paragraph. Notice that I left a blank here. A blank line is a new paragraph in R Markdown. And I wrote a short little paragraph about what we're going to do. We're going to play with the CIA countries data. And then this tick, 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 curly bracket R starts a collection of R code. Now these ticks are the grave button. That's the top left corner of your keyboard. That is not an apostrophe. And I've told it a couple of things. I want it echo equals false, which means do not show me this code. Eval equals true, which means please, when I knit this thing, please actually read this code and do something with it. And then I'm going to call a couple of libraries and pull in a data set. Okay, that's all perfectly fine. So let me knit this thing, and we'll see what that looks like. So knit to HTML. Now, the mouse-driven commands to do this are okay, but I also prefer there's a keyboard shortcut, Command-Shift-K on a Mac. I think it's Alt-Shift-K or Control-Shift-K or something on a Windows. I'm going to knit it. It runs. Okay, here it is. So there's the section header, my first section. Notice it's big and bold. That's the first section header. If I did two hashtags and reknit it, takes a second to reknit. We just wait for a moment here. It's a slightly smaller font here. Yep, there it is. Okay, I want it as the big section header. That's fine. And then you see my text in this document, we will blah, 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 blah. Notice that the CIA countries, that's the data set we're playing with. That guy, I wanted it to look like our code, so I surrounded it by these little backticks. And in here, it has a little gray background and looks like our code. And then my code block, this little chunk of code here, had a bunch of warnings that came with it, and the warnings just keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. And I don't want to force somebody to read or see those warnings. So I'm going to change this to warning equals false. And I'm also going to put message equals false. That way, all of the warnings and all of the messages that get output to the command line are suppressed. So now when I reknit this thing, and again I'm using the keyboard shortcut to knit it. Remember, you can always find the keyboard shortcuts by going to the Tools menu. Alright, now I've got something that's much nicer looking. I've got my first section, I've got all the text, and then all of this chunk of code It did not echo it to me. It did evaluate it. It squashed all the error messages. And right here I saw no code whatsoever. That's perfect. Then I had another section, a subsection as a matter of fact, where I had another paragraph, a chunk of code. This time I actually showed the code. A couple of warnings came through, so I could come through and do the same thing. Warning equals false. Message equals false. I'm going to reknit it. Now for some reason this particular time I wanted to show the code, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes that's going to be used for illustration when we're communicating amongst ourselves. When you're communicating to a non-stats or a non-data science audience, you don't want them to see the code. They don't need to know how you did this, unless it's really imperative. But either way, I have the code here, I have the plot that I intended here, and that's the end of my document. And now I've got this beautiful HTML document that I can look at. I'm using Chrome. It doesn't matter, you can look at it anything. And here's my document. This is really nice. Okay, in the next videos we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of these options.